Everyone. Part 3. I'm going off script this time, so this one is going to be the assembly of everything, getting everything put together and actually creating a helmet, which is really exciting. So starting here, I was just sanding off all the edges so it was all flat but also keyed in. So if I was adding any glue, any filler, any resin, anything like that would all stick together. So this was a bit of an annoying process. Always is, just because, especially trying to capture it on film at the same time. But getting this all prepped meant that I'd have more success. It'd be easier in the long run, especially when I was trying to glue everything together, because if any of the pins wouldn't connect properly, I was definitely able to create a really solid connection between the two printed surfaces. Luckily, PLA prints really easily, so when I was inserting in all of these keys, which were made out of clipped nail heads, clipped nails, I was able to get them to attach really easily. I think this camera footage might not be the best right now, but it's just because the amount of force I was having to use to get these to clip separately was huge, so I had to put some gloves on. Next thing was heating up the nails, so I heated them up using a candle, just holding them as pliers, because PLA it has a relatively low melting point. I was able to heat up the nail to a point where it's hot enough to jam in and melt into it. So here's me just doing the same, adding some resin in between layers to just glue everything together. So as well as having those pins, I'd have a really solid connection on the surface and on the inside as well as on the two touching surfaces as well. So just before I would have jammed both together, I added some resin in there, so it was all clean together. That's Aral Dye I'm using, 2-part epoxy. I think I used a little bit of super glue to tack surfaces together, and then I just used Aral Dye to just add layers on to keep it really held together permanently. I think, as you can see, some areas didn't quite fit together. Some gaps, the warping, I think it's to be expected, especially in an environment I can't quite control, like my dining room. There are winds that go through and change the print, so there was a bit of warping. A few parts were quite warped in comparison, but overall it wasn't too difficult to get done. I think this probably took 6 hours in total to get all the parts together. I started by getting all of the bottom parts together as much as possible, and then just adding the top parts in one at a time, being really careful that I didn't split anything apart, taking lots of gaps to think about if there was any parts that were any parts that weren't quite fitting together, or if any parts were slightly askew, because that would only magnify as I added more parts in. So you see in the background I'm doing the same thing with the pins again, to just, I think, attach the back ring there on the top right with a pin, because I knew that would attach properly and then it'd be symmetric. So that's that, and then I think here I'm trying to figure out the best way of attaching this, whether it's flat on the ground or whether it's better upright like this, and I'm just playing around with the best fit of it, because there was some warping, so I didn't want anything to snap, because that part was quite thin and fragile on its own. So I think I decided to use some tape to hold it in place, alongside the rest of using pins as well, that you can see the tape on the inside, and then just covering the whole thing in super glue and Aral Dye. It was really important to be working outside for this stuff as well, because this stuff is nasty. It was really nasty. So okay, so here we go. It's all put together now. I covered the inside with a load of masking tape. That's what I'm doing here. So then any filler and resin I was adding to the outside to fill in those large gaps wouldn't have leaked through. And also just held the whole thing together using Gorilla Tape. Like, it's really strong stuff. So it was really good for making sure that internally that was held really well, whilst I was putting some pressure in to really squeeze that filler into those bigger gaps to fill those in and make a smoother surface. Like, see my lunch as well. This is quite a self-explanatory step. I was always told, like when I was taught to do this, you're supposed to put the time into these steps, really get this right as possible, because then it saves time later on. If you choose to make a mold out of it. I didn't choose to make a mold out of this one just because I didn't have the facilities to do mold making of this scale at home. So this is I'm using this as its own prop on its own, kind of as a proof of concept 3D printing, as well as theoretically being used as a lighting reference in the film and TV industry. So here you can see me mixing together 2-part car body filler. Really important to wear a mask with this stuff. You read the kosh on it, it's fucking deadly. Sorry for the swearing. Yeah, just mixing more car body filler, just put in loads, just really coating any spaces, any gaps, that surface, just getting that absolutely crammed full of it. So it held everything together, really strengthened everything up, but also made it a lot easier to sand down and create a smoother surface. I think this was probably about 30 minutes of car body filling. Yeah, 30 minutes of car body filling. And then you leave that 30 minutes to cure up to a point where it can be sanded, and then yeah, I get the sander out in a second and get on with getting that really nice and smooth. Just leaving it. Yeah, I think this is me just leaving it. I think I was like cleaning up my space and stuff, working outside on the decking, well ventilated area as well as a mask. Oh yeah, here's me just getting some of the inside spaces as well. Working around that back I wasn't really happy with how that looked, so I added quite a lot there so I could sand through and really perfect that back shape, because I wanted that really nice smooth flat edge. Yeah, and that underneath as well, I think it needed some. So here I am with a plain sander. I started at 80 grit, quite an aggressive grit, but I really wanted to just work through and get that down to something resembling a smooth surface. I argued a lot with the hand sander here. The belt kept coming off. I was pushing in quite hard to get this done, which maybe not the best idea. I'm wearing eye protection here and wearing a mask again. Maybe people at home doing this, be careful. Don't just hold it between your legs like I was and sand it. Maybe find a better way of doing it, but as long as you're careful, that's fine then. Yeah, just sanding all these areas. Anything I want to be smooth, I was using as much of the sander as possible to keep quite a smooth edge, like here along that ridge. Any areas that were more curved, I was using an edge or the top lip of the sander. Here I'm using Dremel to just work through some of the biggest parts. I think I had like a sanding, it's like an array of sandpapers, and it really got through it really quickly compared. Really was able to work through some of that, and I think I went a little bit too deep maybe on some of the parts near the eyes, but that, that's easily fixable with more layers of filling as I go on to do. You can see the amount of dust I'm producing here, so again, it's really important to wear PP for this kind of stuff. Yeah, just being really careful, especially an aggressive grit like 80 grit like that will go through skin quite easily, as well as like respiratory issues of sanding resin dust into your face. So yeah, as you can see, the shape kind of gets more together, and then this layer I mix up some more car body film, but I tinted it pink so I could tell any layers I'd worked through. So I knew the underlayer was white, and then this next layer was a pink layer, so I could see any areas that I'd done already much clearly than if I just kept it the same white colour. Yeah, and just work through any areas that I thought needed more, anything that I'd gone a bit too deep with. I added a lot of car body filler, and just any areas I went really smooth, other than relying on using resin later on, I would just saturate with car body filler, because I knew I could get it a lot smoother, a lot quicker. Get rid of those 3D printing lines as layer marks. So yeah, here I am just again sanding. I think I'm using 120 grit this time, so a little bit finer than the 80 grit. Not very much finer, but again, it was aggressive enough to get through this quite quickly. I think that top was really starting to come together. The sides as well here, that was something at the moment that was really coming together quite nicely. I think the back took a little bit more, yeah, some more car body filler added, because I wanted that to be such a smooth feature, which eventually it does become. Really happy with how it all came out. Yeah, working through plain sanding at this point. I think I've gone to some hand sanding later on to really work through the finer bits, but yeah, I was really lucky. I didn't realise we had a hand sander at home. My dad just said we had one, so yeah, I was able to use that. This next step, I went through, and any areas that I thought were too shallow, I highlighted with a green paint pen. So then when I was adding on the blue filler, I knew exactly the areas that I wanted to add it to, instead of kind of guessing and stressing out a bit once I'd added all the catalyst in. I only had about 5 minutes to chuck it all on, which really helped. As you can see, the top just needed tons, so I just absolutely filled the living daylights out of that. I think some of the green as well wasn't just low points, it was high points that I knew I needed to sand through. So as you can see, the blue has been sanded away. You've seen some of the pink and the white underneath. This marbling effect, I think it was a really great indicator. You could see the shape coming through the smoothness of it, so I was really happy with how it was coming through. Yeah, some of these camera angles, I was using quite a flexible like camera mount, so it kept, especially with the sanding, it was wiggling around a bit, but I think you can still see it all properly, which is really good. Yeah, again, sanding through, I think I was using 120 grit here again, just really making sure I was getting any edges flat, like perfectly flat, so I knew once I did the primer on top, I'd be able to see a lot better what was going on. I think that's in a few more stages, but you know, your hands and your eyes are a really good tell of being able to tell if something's good enough yet. Here we go, just wipe it off and you can see it a lot better now. Going with the Dremel, kind of some of those like recessed lines, really trying to focus up, get those as pristine as possible, so then later on I could go in and they'd be almost perfectly flat, even through all that filler. So yeah, again, it throws up a lot of dust. Be really careful. Here's me mixing up the resin. Again, this stuff is horribly toxic, so yeah, it was really important to wear PPE here. Gloves as well. I applied this with a sponge brush. It's called XTC 3D. It's made specifically for 3D prints, for smoothing out layer lines and just strengthening the whole thing up. But I've used it on wood, I've used it on metal, I've used it on plastic, I've used it on car body filler now, just basically as a smoothing top layer, and it just strengthens all the parts up. After this helmet was rigid. Very confident dropping this a few times, and nothing would have happened. So once that had all cured and set, I then went on, did some more sanding, which I don't think was captured on film, and then I'd layer a primer to see where needed some more filling and sanding. You can see it around that eye, above the grills, what needed doing. So here, adding more filler. Again, I didn't tint it this time yet because it was white again, so I was able to just use it pure. And then this was hand sanding, so I thought at this point, right, I'll use a finer grit. I think this is about 300, and was just going through and really trying to refine those shapes, get them as I want them. I would suggest not wearing clean clothes for doing this kind of work. I thought I was going to do something else today, so I wore alright clothes, and then yeah, by the end of the day they had become work clothes. So I'd bear that in mind. You know, people who aren't professional makers, your clothes will get wrecked, so have separate clothes, or just accept that all your clothes are potentially clothes that can be wrecked. I potentially could have been wearing goggles here. I mean, there wasn't very much wind, and all the dust was mostly going down. I haven't had any issues with my eyes with this, luckily, but in future, or for anyone else, I'd really recommend wearing goggles for this kind of work, just because you don't want to damage your eyes. I am wearing a respirator here, really important, especially with this kind of work. Is knackering, this work, honestly. Sanding, it's 3/4 of the job is just sanding and filling and sanding and filling. I know you hear it a lot, but it honestly is. But you'll be in great shape, which is always positive. I think at this point I've probably done 3 days of filling and sanding, 9 hours a day. So feel free to figure out the maths on that, of how much you should get paid if you were doing this professionally. It's really hard work, but the end product is really worth it to do this much hard work at this stage, because it'll make your life so much easier when it comes to the painting and rendering. You don't have to go back in and fill and sand, which you can see on here, it takes days and days to get it as you want it. Yeah, but it's what we love to do at the end of the day. Yep, I think I was still sanding on the same grit at this point. I think on the next layer, I think I actually go to a finer grit. Oh no, sorry, this layer here was 120 grit. Up on the back here, it's still, you know, you can see how much car body filler's on there to get that smooth. I'll take my mask off here. Yeah, don't do that. Yeah, just I'm working through and really trying to get that as smooth as I can get it. I think I had another few layers of car body filler on there, to get that as filled as I want it to be. But as you can see, I'm really manhandling the mask at this point, really pushing into it, pushing it into myself, pushing it into the ground to sand against to shorten that process, and I could because I'd added that resin layer before. So here it was, another layer of sanding, and I was cutting in the mark where I wanted it to have the effect of two materials meeting. So I cut that in really carefully with the Dremel, and then went in and refined that edge later on with some files. But you can see I've added some filler, and I've been sanding into that to get those lines as smooth as I wanted them to be. Especially around the eyes, there's quite tricky areas, little bits and pieces. It does start to resemble when people are filling and sanding cars, to be honest. Like that's what this starts to look like in the end, because it's the same process, just on a much smaller scale. Yeah, again, just going through and really taking your time and getting these as accurate as you can, because once it gets to painting them, if you've got any points that you're not happy with, it kind of gets more and more exaggerated. You can really see it, so it's really good to take your time and just get these as specific and pristine as you want them to be. Yeah, I was just going and clearing those edges. They get a bit filled with things, and the respirator valves fitted into there, so I want them to be as clean as possible. So there was a really good connection with the glue there. Yeah, more and more sanding. I just had more time, so I was still, I think I was ahead of time on my time scale here, so I just was like, right, I'll keep sanding, I'll keep getting that as smooth as I can. So the end result is as good as I can get it. Yeah, I'm using much finer grit here. I'm using 400 grit here, just really keying up that whole surface, so I knew the primer that I put onto it would be nice. Wet sanding here at 600, so that edge that is just as smooth as possible, and all of that primer layer will go on really nicely and really smoothly. It's becomes quite satisfying at this point. It becomes really smooth and reflective as well. It's the culmination of all the hard work comes together. I think here had been probably 4 days of sanding, 9 hours a day. My shoulders were knackered in the end. So yeah, that's that. And then here's me putting the layer of white primer on it, ready for final rendering soon, which is really exciting. You see I'm really jumping around because of the strange undercut angles. Right, I'll see you guys in a minute. Okay, bye!